And then after that, you have to pay taxes.
Why,
So can you,
why does your attorney look like one? That's supposed to be-
I never wanted to be an attorney.
Yeah. Well, they make big money,
Well, they do
they
make.
cheat you and they take your money and don't give you
I
those
find
services.
very hard to be an attorney.
can you give 10,000 and then, but can you give like
Ask
5,000?
her, do you have an accountant?
No,
We're ready to start when you are.
Do you get H&R Block or something
okay,
called?
all right.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody, the people that are here and the people that are on remote. My name is Jeff Weinberg, and I am president of Caregiver Champion. This is the third of a series that I've been doing. First talk was on how to be your own advocate, which is what I am as a certified healthcare advocate. The second one was on the difference between forgetfulness and dementia. And I didn't show for that because I forgot. Not really. Anyhow, so we talked about that. And the third one, which is today, are on 25 documents that you should be gathering so that God forbid something happens, people will know things about you. And I have had numerous clients who, if they pass away or they're no longer able to think or be conscious for themselves, their family members, can't find the things that they need to find, and B, in some instances, they never had the documents to start off with. And as a result of that, it really makes everything a bigger mess. And the other piece to this is that not only should you be gathering these documents, you should be telling someone where they're at. And you should never put them in a safe deposit box.
You shouldn't.
No, because the safe deposit box, God forbid you pass away, the safe deposit box is automatically locked up. So nobody has access to it because now it's part of a will and whatever's in that safe deposit box. So once again, your family members probably are going to need, or a friend or whatever, they're probably going to need to have access to that information before you need to before you pass away. So I never could figure this out. Where are we with this? Oh, there we are. So this is my book. A lot of this material is based on my book. So again, good record keeping is a must as we age. And these are the basic documents, but there's probably more depending on what your financial situation is, your legal situation. So you should talk to an accountant or an attorney and make sure that you've gathered everything that you think you need. Okay, so the first group is basically things that have to do with things that you own. So, you know. How many know where their deeds of their house are? How many know, you know, what their measurements of their property are?
The mess.
So that's all part of knowing. And why you have to know that, first of all, you need to have a deed to your house, because if you sell, when we just mentioned about somebody giving their house to their family member, if you sell your house, you have to make sure that the person understands not only getting the deed to the house, but also how big the house is. For example, my property on my house, then we live in the city and they're very small homes next to each other, going back to back. And the wall that's on the side of my house is actually the property of the owner on the next door house. So if something happens, they're responsible for that. Talk about trees, it's the same thing. There are trees that are on your, on somebody else's. The trees are large enough that the leaves and the branches are on someone else's property. But the tree is your tree. And what I understand is the case is if the tree branches fall on someone else's property, you could be responsible for paying for the repairs. So it all is tied together. The other thing is the cemetery deed. You know, people don't like to think about this, but in reality, as we age, you should pick up what you're gonna do about your burial. And that could be cremating, it could be, you know, buying the most expensive casket going, whatever. But again, like my children, they don't know where my cemetery plot and my wife's plot is. I told them, but they probably don't pay attention to it.
I don't have one.
Well, you need to get one, or, you know, you need to decide what it is that you want to have happen as part of your funeral or burial or whatever it is you're gonna do. Because otherwise, if nobody knows about what you're gonna do or whatever, or nobody is related to you, you end up either going into, I think it's, this is the right term, but kind of a pauper's grave site, which is just for people that don't know what else to do with them, or they cremate them. And again, I mean, everybody can make choices about what it is that they want to do. They have to let people know. And obviously, when you buy a plot in a cemetery, the value of that plot goes up every year, meaning that, you know, if you wait until you're 80 and you're buying a plot, it's probably going to cost you a lot more than when you are at 60. So once again, you have to, you know, these aren't pretty things to think about, but they are things that one should think about, because it's important. To talk about this just a little bit. Even I've known people, usually it's when they have a chronic condition. But dying is just as important part of living. And how you want to die, which is on another document here, is important. But also, how do you want your funeral? And for example, you know, I want to be buried. I want someone to put a terrible towel in there in my casket and whatever. But the point is that I've given instructions to a family member about how my funeral should be. Okay. I've had people who have passed away that are friends of mine, and they have been very specific as to what they wanted to do. They've even recorded themselves and had someone play it during a funeral. And it was really gut wrenching because he would go, Jared, you know, you're my oldest son, and I've been proud of you, and you know what you've accomplished in life and things like that. And so it just was gut wrenching because it was so unbelievable to hear this person's voice after he had passed away.
Wow.
So housing, your land, your cemetery, in terms of property and deeds, are all important information that you need to have and let people know about. So the next issues have to do with mortgages, proof of loan, debt that you owe, and whose name is it in. So, for example, if your name is the only name on the property, or the mortgage or the loan, then in all likelihood, when you pass away, you don't have to pay for the money. But if your spouses or a partner or whatever, you have joint ownership, then that money is going to go to not the money, well, the money will too, but in terms of this, it would be whatever the amount that's owed, then becomes responsibility of the spouse or the partner.
Or not the children or whoever inherits the house or
Not the
the
children.
estate. Does the state owe the money then?
Wait, so if you have a spouse,
If you don't have a spouse?
if you don't have a spouse and you've set up your estate, so to speak, that money still is part of what's owed. Okay. Now, again, in many instances, one of the spouses pays the bills. And the other one really doesn't know, you know, what's going on.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden, that person who is either incapacitated or is unable or passed away, now this person has to figure this all out. And they have a hard time doing that because they haven't been involved in that process from the beginning. Okay, so the next thing is your car. And you know, the title to your car. Once again, if you have a 1970 Dodge, 1970 Dodge, the value of that car might not be the same as if you have a 2024
Mercedes.
Lincoln, or Mercedes. So the value and so the title becomes important, because if you want to go sell that car, you need to know that you have a title. Otherwise, you can't sell the car. And then stock certificates, savings bonds, who are your brokers? So if you have, you know,
Merrill Lynch.
Merrill Lynch.
Letter, Prudential,
right. So if you have a broker, you need to know who that broker is, and also write it down and give them the contact information, because they're gonna need it to determine what estate or assets you have in that estate. So that's very important. And again, sometimes the broker has your stock certificates, and sometimes you own your stock certificates. But it's not just a matter of like piling up the certificates and saying, here, they're in the refrigerator, which is sometimes a very safe place to keep things. But it's, you have to then, you know, outline, you know, I have AT&T stock. I have 100 shares. The value is $10,000, which fluctuates, but at least people know how many shares of that stock you have. The same thing goes with anything else that you own that is part of your estate. Okay. So this is all has to do with health. And starting with your personal and family medical history. So once again, somebody might be aware of it, but in many instances, they don't have the details. So take, for example, a person who is beginning to have dementia. That person isn't able to relay the information. So somebody needs to know, you know, not only about does he or she have a history of dementia, or what other problems do they have? Do they have heart problems? Do they have diabetes problems? Do they have cancer? So all of those things become important while you're alive, and even when you've passed away, because your family members might not know that you had a certain thing. In today's world with genetics, there's things that people end up with. For example, when we were having children, which was in the dinosaur age, we had, you know, all of a sudden, I think it was they just started doing chromosome testing. And they found out that I was positive for Tay-Sachs disease. And which is a disease that it primarily is in people that are Jewish, but it doesn't have to be. And it's not a very great illness, and usually you pass away from it. So that got into a whole other history but the point was, once we found that. Then the doctor was able to do some other testing. To find out that, you know, my wife wasn't positive and it was okay. But at the same time, my children needed to know that. So that, you know, they would be out on the lookout for that. And as it turns out, one of my grandchildren is a carrier now of Tay-Sachs disease. So now we're getting into what is very important. And we're going to skip to number 9 first, which is called the living will. It's not the same as the will. The living will is also called an advance directive. And the advance directive talks about, in the event that I am no longer able to make decisions for myself, here's what I want to have happen. And that could be from having all care possible, including being put on a ventilator or every other kind of life support system, to having very little care once you have a chronic condition. And there's nobody to place an opinion on this. It truly is your choice. I dealt with a woman who was an Orthodox Jewish woman. And she ended up being put on a ventilator. And every time they tried to take her off the ventilator, she couldn't breathe. She kept gasping for air.
That was my mother. That was my mother.
That's your mother. So, what, do you mind sharing what happened?
She died. Well, I mean, they couldn't get her off of it, so
She died with the ventilator or?
well, I guess they took her off of it finally.
So, but in some instances, and my son happens to be a very religious Jewish person. He believes that in all instances, you have to be able to do everything possible until that person does. So they could be on a ventilator for months.
That's a hard thing to watch though. It looks like it would be very uncomfortable.
Well, it is a hard thing to watch. But the point is that's what he believes.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, my living will, which because I've been in healthcare all my life, and I've seen so many illnesses and people suffering and all of this, my belief is that when my quality of life has become impaired, I do not want to be put on any kind of artificial way to maintain my life. I also have in there that if my son, Seth, comes and starts to try to dictate what should happen, just throw him the hell out of the room. Yes, he can't. Okay. And I actually have my daughter Jessica, who is in healthcare herself. She has primary decision making on my healthcare power of attorney. So my daughter has healthcare power of attorney jointly with my wife. And the only time it would be different is when I'm in possibly passing and I'm not able to recover. So at that point, Uh, Jessica would make the decision instead of my wife, because I think it would be a terrible decision to make, saying, you know, I don't want this person on life supports, or I want to take them off of life supports. And it would be very difficult for my wife to make it. Of course, that depends on the day.
Depends on what.
The day. So my daughter Jessica is jointly, and this is how it's written in the living will, is jointly healthcare power of attorney with my wife. The other piece to a living will is also what's called a medical power of attorney. I'm sorry, I just said medical, I meant financial power of attorney. And the financial power of attorney is someone who will manage your affairs at the point that you're no longer able to do so. So again, if someone has beginning stages of dementia, or they're unconscious, or they're just not able to function in a way where they can manage their own financial affairs. If you've designated someone to do that, then they're empowered to be able to do it. And it could be, you know, you have to go to the bank and have the bank be aware of that. Usually I tell people that if you're a power of attorney, then you probably should be jointly on checking accounts and savings accounts and things like that. Because then automatically it makes it easy. If you're not on those accounts, then what happens is that you have to bring in your documents to show them that you're able to do these kinds of things. And sometimes, you know, I don't know if the woman was on the phone from Iron Zoom before, but one of the things that I said to her was to make sure that your documents are updated. Because sometimes somebody who's been appointed power of attorney, whether they're medical or financial, but she moved from, I think, Pennsylvania to Virginia, she may not have, those people who could do it in Pittsburgh may not be able to do it in Virginia. So you want to have someone that you know that you can make sure that they do that for you. And all of these things are crucial. And I have to tell you, the average age of the people that I deal with is probably around 80. And I would say 60 or 70% of them don't have this done. They don't have advanced directives. They have not given power of attorney to their person who could handle their affairs. And they really haven't had an advanced directive to determine what needs to occur. So for example, if you call 911, automatically 911 is going to do everything possible to keep you alive. And then they're going to take you to the emergency room to keep you alive. And so it just continues that way until someone can show what your advanced directive is. And so it's very important, both from a medical perspective as well as a financial perspective. Now, DNR, which is do not resuscitate orders, they are usually included in your advanced directive, But if you're in a personal care home, I'm not sure what you do, Vicki, but there's a thing that's called a yellow, no, a pink form. And you can get it from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And it basically becomes a doctor's order that says do not resuscitate. And if you put that, in your home, and then the people from an ambulance company or whatever, if they're given that, then they don't resuscitate. Because it really is a doctor's order that is telling you what to do. So, marriage license and divorce papers. Once again, for example, and as I was going through this stuff for myself, I was like, I can't find my marriage license. Okay. So, and we were married in Cleveland. And so I'm trying to get it so that we have that. And once again, why do you need a marriage license? Well, there's a lot of things that are tied into being legally married. Again, a part of your estate, part of assets, but things that you own, that you need to show your marriage license for. You have a question?
No,
Oh,
no.
okay.
I have a comment, please.
Go ahead.
So I moved to Virginia, and in 2 months, I went to transfer our licenses for the real ID for Virginia licenses. The government of Virginia would not accept our church marriage license. We had to go and get one from the courthouse.
Your government wouldn't accept your marriage license. Where did you get married?
In a church. I had the marriage license from the church. It wasn't valid in Virginia. We had to go to the courthouse in Beaver to get the court document.
So you were married in Pennsylvania
Yes,
and they didn't accept that?
that the Virginia in 2000, January of 2019, the state of Virginia would not accept our religious marriage license. We had to get the court document.
Well, that actually is common, and I'll tell you why. The license has to be registered with the state. For example, my daughter got married by a rabbi who actually was a personal friend of hers. And at the end of the wedding ceremony, there was a person who was a constable who was there to certify the marriage certificate. So it appears to me, and again, I'm not an attorney and I don't know state laws all that well, but it appears to me that when you have a religious ceremony and it hasn't been registered with the state, that the state doesn't recognize it. Does that make sense?
I understand that. I'm just saying this so that the people in your audience that are probably my age and older know that they need to get, if they want to get real ID, they need to get the court document.
That's very good, and I'm glad you brought that out.
Thank you.
Because I actually forgot about it with my granddaughter. But you're right, if it's a religious ceremony, and it hasn't been certified by the state.
It was certified by the state. It's just that I did not have the court
You didn't
document.
have that document.
I had the religious original document, because also when you go for real ID, you need the original documents.
Exactly. Yeah,
But I'm just saying, I think the majority of us that have been married 45, 50, 60 years had never went to the courthouse and got the actual document, because I had never heard of that until 2019. I didn't even know there was an official document. Thank you.
well, you're making a very important point, and I'm actually gonna add that to this because, it is that important. Because people don't realize that if they don't have the state or official document, that in essence, they're, not being recognized as being married. And not, to take this one step further, if you're in a sort of a relationship with someone and you're both female or you're both male and you've gotten married, there are only certain states that recognize that as being married. And if you got married in a state that doesn't recognize that, then you're really still not married. And why is that important? Well, A, if that spouse passes away, you could be entitled to Social Security benefits. You can be entitled to other things financially, but you have to show proof that you've been married. The other piece to that is there is what's called aid and attendant benefits through the Veterans Administration. And if the person, male or female, has been a veteran during an active war, then their spouse, depending on what their income is, their spouse is able to get money as a caregiver to take care of that veteran. And that, so once again, you're gonna have to show a marriage license to say that you're a spouse as part of the, and anybody that deals with the government, the 50 other pieces of paper that you have to fill out. The other part of there, and I don't know if it's on this or not, is that you should have your discharge if you've been in the service or your spouse has been in the service. You should have your discharge papers. Because once again, if you need to get something through the VA, having your discharge papers helps you to get it. And if you want to get what is called aid and attendant benefits, that's the only way you're going to be able to get it is by A, showing that you're married, but B, also having your spouse's discharge papers. And once again, most people do not have their discharge papers. And for that, you have to write to whatever division you've been in, the Army or the Navy or Coast Guard, and write to the national part of that. I think the Army's was in St. Louis, I'm not sure. But if you don't have that, those discharge papers, it's very important that you get them. And thank you again for doing that, bringing that up. So,
Excuse me,
yeah,
I'm sorry. There is something else very important also.
come on.
The very beginning of the pandemic, my brother-in-law, who was born in Italy, had severe dementia. He was not allowed to be admitted to a nursing home because he did not have his original naturalization paper. So there's all these oddball things that I know about because of situations that just happened to me in the last few years. So if you were not born in the United States, so you do not have a United States birth certificate, but you have a naturalization paper, you need to have that to be admitted into a nursing home.
Well, yeah, you're correct, because what happens is that whatever state you're in at that point, you become a citizen of that state. But the nursing homes get Medicare and Medicaid funding, which is federal and state money.
Yes, he
And
was
they won't-
already, he
I'm
was
sorry.
already on Medicare, he was already on Social Security, but they would not admit him and he needed to die at home during the pandemic because he could not find, his family could not find his naturalization paper. So he was fully documented, but they needed, and they even went to the courthouse and the courthouse said, no, you needed to have the original one. So this is so bizarre. I don't know if it's just, so thank you. I'll be quiet now, but I'm just mentioning.
No, I don't want you to be quiet.
But you know what? It was just.
I want you to keep contributing, because that's the way I learn and everybody else learns.
Yeah, it was a shock. So he actually died at home in his living room at the beginning of the pandemic, which was, I could say, fortunate in a way, because if he would have gone into the nursing home, they would have not able to been with him in his last moments. So
Exactly.
he died the first week of May 2019, just as everything was completely shut down. Hospitals, the birth fathers couldn't be in the hospital, but they refused to admit him because he did not have his, and that's the same way it used to be with the DD 214. But just recently, the
Tell
VA,
people what that means.
that's your discharge papers from the military.
Okay,
We're just mentioning.
yeah,
So now the VA, just in the last couple weeks, allow people to get their DD 214 from a military website. They don't have to have the original one. But this is so bizarre that you actually have to have the embossed original documents sometimes. Thank you.
thank you. Not to place value on your brother-in-law. But he was probably better off dying at home during COVID.
That's exactly how we felt, because at that period, no one knew how things were going to shut down. But if he had been in a nursing home, like I'll just reiterate, that if we can remember, this was just a few years ago. If somebody was in a nursing home or a hospital, no relatives were allowed to see them in their dying moments.
Exactly. In fact,
And
it's in my book.
It's hard for us to believe that, we're talking just, well, I guess it's going on 4 years now, but I think a book needs to be, okay, my last soapbox will be this. I think there needs to be a national day of giving, not just a day off for work, for the millions of people that have died from COVID. And they continue to die of 20,000. Just recently, I saw a total of 20,000 people died, worldwide, just in the month of December. So this is still ongoing for some. So thank you very much for your time. I'm just, things that you bring up just strike a nerve with me, because they're so important. And I appreciate you letting me have a few moments here, because we never knew this, that original documents were so important.
They are, and that's why this class is important, because some people have some of these, some of the people don't have any of them. And in reality, you need to gather all of this information. But I mentioned in my book that my mother-in-law, when COVID hit, she was in a nursing home and she was very healthy, basically. But once my wife stopped visiting, within 2 months, she passed away from what basically was failure to thrive. She just gave up and she passed away. So it's very sad and it's just as things that happen. You were mentioning about, COVID and we were talking here ahead of time. That the person who's the Secretary of Health is a Harvard graduate who lives in Florida. He doesn't believe in anything. And it's publicly come out with this. So again, it depends on where you live and how things get interpreted and what goes with what. But thank you. I really appreciate you doing this. So we've kind of touched on this before, but once again, these are documents that are all financial or deal with your retirement. And people need to have, and I'm looking at this going, I know my kids, and probably my wife actually, doesn't know what pensions I have and where they're from and what, how much they are. The life insurance policies, they usually, you usually are able to have them and make people aware of them. But this is on a very detailed level. And people don't do the details. So again, where's your bank accounts? Where's your credit cards? What are your passwords? Where's your safe deposit box? How do you access it? Where's the key? And names and passwords. To this day, I can never remember all the frigging names and passwords. So you have to write them down somewhere. And again, make sure that someone else knows where they're at. Because if you don't write them down, no one can get into these bank accounts or credit card information or whatever it is that you have that you don't have access to. So when I first did this, I didn't add names and passwords. And then it was like somebody suggested it. And I was like, oh my God, yes. That is so important. Okay, so now this is the will. So there's a difference between the living will and the will. Everything that you gave to someone for power of attorney or medical or financial, once that person passes away, that's what I said about not putting things in a safe deposit box. The only thing that comes into effect is the will. And typically are naming someone to manage that will. And follow the instructions that are on the will. If you don't have someone manage that will, then your assets and your estate go into what's called probate. And now the government's involved. And the government then determines based on, I'm not quite sure, but it won't work out, I promise you, the way you wanted it to. So the document is very important to say who is going to manage my estate. And if you don't have that, then it will go to probate. And so the rest of these documents we've talked about: birth, adoption, okay. People who have been adopted, they lots of times don't bother to go back to find out who their natural parents are. However, if you're adopted, and let's just say you're gonna have children, or even for your own sake, you don't have a medical or family history to go by, because everything is inherited through your natural parents. So even though a lot of people don't want to go back because they appreciate the family they grew up in and they feel like that's their part of their family, I would recommend that if you can find out who your natural parents are, that you should do that. Only in that it then gives you like a gap about your own life in terms of medical, genetic kinds of history that you then become more. And that's it. So any questions, comments? Anything else anybody wants to?
I have a question. I don't know, it's probably not very pertinent, but there's a legal implication to it. Know of a man who probably, who was married. The marriage occurred in the United States, but somewhere between probably 1915 and 1925, there was a separation, and from his wife, and he went to Italy, where he became married and returned with his Italian wife to the United States, and they had a family. I don't know what legally was divorce permitted back then. If you could comment on that, I'd appreciate that.
Divorce has always been something that you can do. So if, I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer or an attorney, but in my opinion, if he just separated from his wife and then moved to Italy and got married, he actually now has two wives.
That's called a bigot.
I totally agree. You said that divorce wasn't possible back then?
No, divorce has always been possible. Divorce is something that's been on the state books or for as long as I'm aware. There wasn't a time where people could not get divorced.
So he very well could have been divorced and then went to Italy.
Well, yeah, that's different than being separated.
Yeah. See, I don't know if he was divorced or not. That's part of the puzzle here. But thank you very much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, all of these things get a little tricky. If you get married in Las Vegas, you know, you don't need anything but to get married. And you can get married in an Elvis chapel. And it's not that expensive, but I'll tell you what, to get a divorce and if you can get a divorce, you know, the next day, and there are people that wake up and realize, oh my God, I'm married.
There's the movies about that.
Yeah. But when you get a divorce, it's like 10 times more money than it was to get married.
Arm and a leg.
And, you know, in order to get married in certain states, you need to show blood tests and whatever else. In other places, you just go get married.
There was a rom-com where they got married, they were drunk, they got married. And then they were playing the slots or something and they won over $1 million. And then they decided they didn't want to be married anymore, but then it was $5 million, something like that, but you know, what do they do about that?
Yeah, well, they're married, they're both entitled. I had, Marvin sort of knows a lot about my family. So my wife's brother, who lives in Cleveland, and he's a little on the weird side. He married this woman who was from Russia.
Was what?
From Russia. Okay. And once he got married, like 2 months later, she pulled up with a truck and emptied out all of it. But he was, you know, as long as they were married, she was entitled to all of his assets. And he really got stuck with a lot of stuff that he's never been able to do. And why did she get married? To get a green card and become part of the country. Well, thank you very much. My next talk is on Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare, and what constitutes all of those different levels. And if you're interested in my book, it's available on Barnes and Noble and Amazon. All right, thank you. Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot.
very much.
Yeah, thanks for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Well,